How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the Project Reboot kitchen. Today in the kitchen, I'm super excited to share with y'all a very special holiday recipe. We're going to be making an amazing pumpkin cheesecake topped with a rich and buttery holiday spice caramel sauce. As a kid, I had so many fond memories of my mom preparing for the holiday festivities by making cheesecake. I looked forward to it every year, and even when I was absolutely stuffed after Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner, I always made sure that I had room for a bite of Mom's cheesecake. Well, this year, as a part of our Healthy Holiday series, I'm going to be showing you how to make a totally guilt-free, low-carb version of this classic holiday dessert. Now, if you're new here, or if you've been enjoying our Healthy Holiday series, we'd love it if you'd subscribe so we can bring you even more recipes that are sure to become family favorites in your home. All right, without further ado, let's get started. We're going to start things off by making our crust, which requires just a few simple ingredients. We'll need 2 cups of almond flour, 1/3 cup of melted butter, a teaspoon of cinnamon, a teaspoon of vanilla extract, a pinch of salt, and a tablespoon of sugar substitute. Here I'm using allulose, which we used throughout the recipe, and it came out really well. Alternatively, you can use swerve, monk fruit, or your favorite sugar substitute. First up, let's be proactive and preheat our oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 175 degrees Celsius. That way it'll be ready to go by the time we're done making our crust, which should only take a few minutes. Now we're going to make life easier on ourselves by breaking out our handy-dandy food processor. If you don't have a food processor, you can totally still make this recipe. You'll just have to put a little bit more muscle and elbow grease into it. You can always use a standing mixer or a hand mixer instead. But for me, I don't mind busting out the big guns for just such an occasion as this. If you're in the market, we've had this Cuisinart food processor since we got married almost 15 years ago. It's built like a tank and still going strong, so it's a great investment even if you only use it occasionally. So we'll start by adding all of our dry ingredients into the food processor one by one. When I'm baking, I love taking the time to have everything pre-measured so it's ready to go when I need it. It just makes the whole process feel super quick and easy. After we've got all the dry ingredients in there, we'll add our wet ingredients, starting with the vanilla extract, and then the butter. Now that all of our ingredients are nice and cozy, it's time to mix things up by giving the mixture 10 to 12 quick pulses until everything is fully incorporated and you've got a mixture that looks like this. Next up, we have a piece of required equipment for this recipe, our springform pan. For the uninitiated, springform pans are super helpful when it comes to cheesecake because the sides lift away from the bottom, which makes it so much easier to slice and serve without damaging your cheesecake. Here we have a 9-inch springform pan that we got at the store for under $10. We'll take some butter and grease the sides and bottom of the pan thoroughly. And once everything's good to go, we'll pour in our crust mixture and do our best to spread it evenly across the bottom of the pan. I find that using the back side of a spoon really helps to get the mixture nice and uniform. Once you've got something that looks nice and smooth like this, it's time to put it in your already preheated oven for 10 to 12 minutes at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. When the timer goes off, we'll pull our crust out of the oven and let it sit and cool for another 10 minutes or so, which should be just enough time to make our cheesecake batter. But before we get started, let's take a second to turn down our oven to 325 degrees Fahrenheit or about 162 degrees Celsius to get it prepped for our cheesecake. Now that we've got that out of the way, it's time for my favorite part. We're going to make the cheesecake batter. Now for this part of the recipe, we're going to need an obnoxious amount of cream cheese. I've got 6 bricks of it here. 1.5 cups of allulose, about 1/2 cup of pumpkin puree, 2 tablespoons of pumpkin pie spice, 6 eggs, and 2 tablespoons of vanilla extract. We'll start by adding our cream cheese and sour cream to our food processor. Pro tip, you may want to soften your cream cheese by microwaving it or leaving it out at room temperature for a couple of hours. Now, a quick note on size. I've got a 14-cup food processor here, and this recipe nearly maxed it out in terms of capacity, so plan accordingly if your food processor is smaller. After we've endured the sticky sounds of cramming all of that cream cheese into the food processor, it's time for us to pulse it a few times until it's a silky smooth consistency. Then it's time for us to add the rest of our ingredients, starting with the allulose, then the pumpkin pie spice, a pinch of salt, and then another for good measure, the pumpkin puree, and finally the vanilla extract. Now, we'll let the food processor run and try its best to incorporate all the ingredients, but don't expect to get it perfect the first time around. You're going to need to take a break about every 30 seconds or so and help things along by scraping down the sides of the bowl. Once we've got a mixture that looks pretty uniform, we're going to start incorporating our eggs one at a time while the food processor is running. For this task, I found that using a Pyrex measuring cup with a spout like this one provides a lot of control when you're trying to introduce just one egg at a time. After the eggs are fully incorporated, give everything a final stir, and you should have a batter that has a rich and velvety consistency. Now, before we pour this on top of our crust, we're going to take some aluminum foil and tightly wrap the bottom of our springform pan. And then we're going to place that whole affair onto a baking sheet. Then we'll place a kettle on the burner and heat up some water that we'll later pour onto the baking sheet to provide a moist, warm bath for our cheesecake to bake in. This technique insulates the sides of the cheesecake to help it cook more evenly and prevent cracking or sinking. Now that we've got our pan tightly wrapped in aluminum foil, it's time to pour that luscious batter into the pan. Make sure to use a silicone spatula to scrape every last drop of batter out of that bowl. Now, before we add the hot water, let's make life considerably less dangerous by placing our cheesecake in the oven first. That way, we won't risk burning ourselves with hot water when we're on our way to the oven. We'll open up the oven and pull out our wire rack carefully. Remember, it's really hot. And then gently place our baking tray on top. Now we're safe to pour the hot water from our kettle into the bottom of the baking tray. And once we've got a nice little moat going on, we'll push the wire rack back into the oven and let everything bake at 325 degrees Fahrenheit for 75 minutes. Now friends, I know it's hard, but do not, under any circumstances, open your oven while the cheesecake is baking. That hot water is creating a nice and steamy environment for your cheesecake, and you don't want to lose a drop of that moisture. You can keep yourself busy by making the holiday spice caramel sauce, which I'm going to show you how to do now. Now this caramel sauce is so delicious that I decided to make a double batch of this stuff to add to my coffee in the mornings. It'll keep in the fridge for up to 2 weeks, but in our house, this stuff disappears much faster than that. That said, if you just need enough for the cheesecake, just make a half batch. To get started, we'll need to gather a couple of ingredients. We'll start with 16 tablespoons of high-quality butter. We're using Kerrygold here. Next, we'll need 2 cups of allulose, 2 cups of heavy whipping cream, 4 teaspoons of blackstrap molasses, and 2 tablespoons of pumpkin pie spice. We'll start by firing up the stove and finding ourselves a pot. And then we'll throw our butter in there and watch it slowly melt until it becomes bubbly and frothy. Make sure you keep the butter moving and look underneath the foam to monitor the color of the butter. As the butter cooks, it will become darker and take on a wonderfully nutty flavor. Once it starts to turn a rich shade of brown, we'll quickly add our allulose to stop the butter from browning any further. We'll give that a good stir and then add our heavy cream, keeping the mixture moving the entire time. Next up, we'll add our blackstrap molasses and our pumpkin pie spice and then give everything a good mix. Next, we'll reduce to low heat and let everything combine for about 15 minutes, being careful not to touch it as it starts to look like liquid magma in your pot. After sitting on your hands for 15 minutes, go ahead and give everything a good stir, and then behold the liquid gold you've created. Now this caramel needs to cool for a bit, so we're going to store it in this mason jar until we're ready for it. Now it's time to check on our cheesecake. After 75 minutes is up, we'll crack open the oven and take a peek. This looks perfect. We'll let the oven vent for about 5 minutes, and then we'll close it back up and let the cheesecake cool for another 1 to 2 hours. And then we'll cover it up and put it in the fridge to set overnight. After dreaming of cheesecake all night, it's finally time to finish everything up and dig in. We'll take the cheesecake out of the fridge and carefully unsnap the latch on the springform pan. Then we'll slowly lift and reveal an absolutely perfect gradient of fall colors on the side of our cheesecake. Now, it's time to top our cheesecake with a delightful sour cream topping that will provide us with just a hint of tartness and a wonderful visual contrast for our upcoming cross-section. Here we're layering on a mixture of sour cream and allulose, And we're going to spread it evenly across the top of our cheesecake. Then we'll take the caramel sauce we prepared yesterday and drizzle it generously across the top of our cheesecake. And as a final garnish, we'll grate some fresh nutmeg on top, sit back, and admire our holiday masterpiece. At the risk of sounding immodest, I have to tell you that this cheesecake is one of the best cheesecakes I've ever had. In fact, it's one of the best desserts that I've ever had, period. It's amazing to me that something so low-carb and gluten-free can taste so decadent and delicious. Y'all have to try it for yourselves. And if you do decide to make your own low-carb cheesecake this holiday season, we'd love it if you'd like this video and left us a comment. We really want to hear how it goes. In the meantime, subscribe to check out more of our healthy holiday recipes. But for now, bon appetit! We'll see you next time, fam!
Yeah, that's good.